Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So we're all gathered together for a dissertation defense, and it's Sergio Rodriguez-Castillo who is going to defend his doctoral dissertation today. And the title of his dissertation is An Integral Blueprint for Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy, the Training of a General Practitioner of the Soul. And Sergio has a committee of three members. I am Debashish Banerjee. I'm the chair of the East West Psychology Department and the chair of Sergio's committee. And the other two members are distinguished people in this field. Dr. Susana Bustos, adjunct faculty in the East West Psychology Department. Susana is a transpersonal counselor, professor of psychology, and independent researcher on entheogenic shamanic traditions of the Americas. She is also certified in Gestalt therapy, holotropic breathwork, and transpersonal psychology, and in the expressive arts. She holds a private practice in Berkeley, California. And Dr. William A. Richards is an international leader in the study of psychedelics. He teaches in the psychiatry department of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. With formal degrees both in psychology and theology, Dr. Richards is interested in the intersection between the two, particularly the psychology of religion. Dr. Richards was key in the relaunch of psilocybin research in the late 1990s and is one of the pioneers of the contemporary resurgence of psychedelic research. He notably wrote and presented Psychedelic Psychotherapy, Insights from 25 Years of Research in 2013. So this is the committee of Sergio. The way we will conduct this defense is that we will request Sergio to make a presentation. It can be a presentation for up to an hour, though we hope that it's a little shorter. And this will be followed by the actual oral defense, where the committee will ask Sergio questions, perhaps for 2 to 3 rounds. The audience will get a chance to participate in at least one of those rounds. And after that, we will convene separately and discuss the defense, while Sergio can continue his conversation with the audience. So with that, without further ado, I will request Sergio to come forward, and the table or whatever is all his to present his work, his very painstaking work, which he has conducted, to
Yes.
share it with us. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Devashish. And I hope I don't share my pain with you all in this in this presentation. I'm very grateful to be here. Let me start sharing my screen. Thank you all. So thank you everyone. I wish I could name each one of you for being here. It's so amazing that you're showing up to support me. I'm very excited and very nervous about this. I want to express my gratitude, infinite gratitude to my committee for putting up with me. I got really excited about this dissertation. Just so you know, just those that you know dissertation, my dissertation is almost 600 pages long because I put all my passions in there, right? I'm talking about integral education. I'm talking about psychotherapy. I'm talking about psychedelics. I'm talking about indigenous tradition. So everything that means something to me is poured into this dissertation. So it's a lot. And like I say, I hope you don't have to suffer what I suffer going through. I also hope that this is my last dissertation ever. So I wanted to put everything there. So bear with me. And let me start with a quote right? And this quote from Janice Phelps, faculty at CIS, in many ways inspired my dissertation. I've been involved in the field for almost 20 years, but I couldn't agree more with Janice that it's time to talk seriously about the training of psychotherapy guys. It's a big deal. I'm familiar with the promises of perils of psychedelic-assisted therapy. I want to start by telling you two stories. They're both stories that happened to me, not directly to me, but I was directly involved in both of them. The first one happened when I was still teaching at CIS. I used to teach a class at 7 a.m. in the morning on Mondays. Not the most popular class. It was my transpersonal psychotherapy class, but students made it. And this particular time, we always start with a check-in. We were in the middle of the check-in, and I noticed that one student was really struggling. He was almost, he couldn't stand still. He was teary-eyed. When he was his time to check in the circle, he apologized. He said, "I almost didn't make it here. I had a psychedelic session yesterday with 5-MeO DMT. For those of you that know how that's a strong, powerful psychedelic, and he was struggling. So we wait until the end of the class, and I asked him to join me in my room because I wanted to support him. And when he sat down and I asked him, "What's going on?" he just burst out crying and said, "I don't want to be the cause to the end of the world," which of course I didn't understand. So I asked further, and what happened is that he had kind of this messianic doomsday experience where he was either going to be the savior of the world or the destructor of the world. That was a lot to hold for him and for me. So I start asking him more questions. Okay, tell me about your preparation. I say, no preparation. A friend of a friend knows someone that knows someone. So I just went to his house. There was a bunch of us. Within half hour, say, okay, don't worry. The medicine is good. The medicine is gentle. The medicine is going to show you what you need to do. And within half an hour, he was up there and back, totally discombobulated, dysregulated, and then say, well, and then what is the integration? Say, none. After that, we talked for about half an hour. We drank something, and I went home and I couldn't sleep the whole night. So terrible experience. And it took us a few days, if not weeks, to get him back to this level of reality. So things can go bad. Things can go difficult. To contrast it with another experience, this is more recent. This is with a veteran. I was doing some ceremony with one veteran, and he was really struggling. He was not able to be in the same room with his wife and children because the noise triggered him, and he couldn't stay there. So he was really isolating himself, and he couldn't be with his family. So we did the ceremony, and I got an email from him recently, and he said, along many things, he said, life is suddenly peaceful to me. This experience saved my life. Now, of course, we could say more. We could say a lot about the different psychedelics. We could say about the different personality types, the different psyche, etc. But if you were to ask me, what is the big difference between these two experiences? I would say, without hesitation, preparation, guidance, and integration. Any experience could be a good or a bad experience, and it's how is held what happened. And the stakes are really high at this point. As you probably know, the use of psychedelics, both in the US and worldwide, is increasing. Together with the increasing use of psychedelics, there's also an increase in research in psychedelics. This graph just shows how there has been a constant increase in the papers connected with psychedelics in one way or another. And of course, the interest is in many areas, from inflammation, Lyme disease, diabetes, Alzheimer, deep disorder, but especially in mental health, in things like depression, anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, existential distress, you name it. There's interest in all these different areas, right? And as you can imagine, when there's more interest, there's the more need for duly, and I'm underlining the word duly there, trained facilitators. I've met plenty wounded users, people that the example that I gave, use psychedelics and it didn't go well for them. And sadly, I've also met a few self-appointed shamans. And this one I didn't meet, but some of you may remember Jacob Chansley. He was among those that stormed the Capitol. And the reason why I'm bringing him there, I'm putting his picture, is because he was a self-appointed psychedelic shaman. So this is also important because not all shamans, not all guides or facilitators are created equal. We need to understand who are we working with. As a result, multiple programs are growing, but there's no clarity about what should be included. There's some things that I will explain in a moment, but there's no clear about what to include, and programs will add whatever they have available, right? So today is my answer to this situation, right? Right now we're dealing with the Wild West, and I'm hope that I'm presenting you with a potential answer to that. And let me present you the roadmap for the day. As I said, almost 600 pages, so it's a lot. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So let's charge ahead, and I'll give you a hint. When we get to surprises, you know that we're getting closer to the end. So if you're getting a little overwhelmed, it's a lot of information. When you hear surprises, okay, we're down the hill now. It's going to be a lot easier. So what's the issue? I talked the situation. What's the issue? As I said, programs are on the rise, and there are two dynamics that are shaping this growth in programs. One is regulatory change, and you can see in that map, all the green states are places where some form of legal reform to either legalize or decriminalize psychedelics are taking place. The dark green ones are places where psychedelics are already legal, Oregon and Colorado. And all the little black dots are places where psychedelics are currently decriminalized, which is a different thing. So one is regulatory change. We've seen that in the places, Oregon and Colorado, where the legal status of psychedelics change. There was a rush for programs, more programs open in those states than anywhere else for obvious reasons. Now they will be able to train therapists. And the second one is financial gain. And of course, there's nothing wrong with financial gain. But as you can imagine, when there's a competing forces between financial gain and costs, programs can find ways to try to cut corners. There's a tendency in the West to think that faster means better. So programs are reduced in length. Programs may be inclined to ignore the minorities or the oppressed groups. They might sacrifice rigor. So there's something, not everybody does, but it's a risk. And that's why that's part of the problem. We know that in the field of psychedelics, getting lost is not hard. It happened before. Some of you are old enough to remember things got derailed before. So we have to be mindful of that. And because there are no clear guidelines about what to include, programs are, some of them, incomplete, lopsided, biased, different program universities or organizations will put in the program whatever is available for them. So if they have a lot of doctors around, they're going to emphasize the medical aspect. If they have a lot of psychotherapy people, but they have psychotherapy program, probably going to slant towards psychotherapy. So the thing is that we just don't know what we don't know, right? So if we are those graduates of those programs may be unprepared, may just don't even know that they are not fully prepared to deal with the complexity of the psychedelics experience. So there is a gap there. And my hope is that this dissertation is a contribution to an answer to that problem. Something needs to be done. So my question in addressing this gap is basically this one. What should an integral informed blueprint for training psychotherapists be? Just one question. I'm departing for the assumption that a blueprint would help people reduce risks, have clear guidelines about what needs to be included or not. It helps reveal blind spot both in the programs or on the facilitator, avoids dangers, conserve resources, prevents harm. So there's a lot there. Now, let's not forget that this is a dissertation presentation, so things are gonna get a little heady. Bear with me. Talking about the purpose and the scope of my dissertation. I wanted to determine what an integral, all-encompassing blueprint should include. Now, not all-encompassing for everything, that I'll talk about more in the scope, but something to train psychedelic therapists specifically that can be used both as a benchmark for existing programs and programs to be developed, and also a benchmark for potential applicants to see, okay, let's check this benchmark, let's check this blueprint and see if this program that I wanted to apply to covers all these aspects, or at least covers aspects that I want to include. The scope of this integral means all those areas. The hope is that it includes both the scientific contributions of the West with the wisdom of the traditions of all over the world at a balanced level. That is something that is not really happening. We have programs that are very focused on the traditions, which are wonderful, and programs that are very focused on the scientific, which are also wonderful, but they're not finding that balance. And another important point of the scope is the idea that my project included to create a blueprint to be implemented in Western organizations. Kind of perhaps universities, but not necessarily universities, but organizations in the West or similar institutions. Here comes the next one is the most difficult slide to present, because there's no simple way to say this, right? The methodology, I chose a pragmatic worldview, which is qualitative, comparative, documentary, and naturalistic stance, and apply a constructivistic grounded theory methodology. If there's ever a mouthful, that's it. But the goal is very simple. Every single choice, every single of those methodology choices were focused and strategic to ensure that whatever blueprint came out of it was grounded in the data emerging from the comparison of the programs and the real world, and it was applicable. I didn't want something that was theoretical. It is theoretical, but something pragmatic, something applicable. Almost forgot to mention, because I'm not going to touch it in my presentation, but even before this chapter in my dissertation, I spent a full humbling chapter dealing with my positionality and my subjectivity, right? All that had to do with who I am. I am a Mexican, cisgender, heterosexual, middle class, bilingual, educated, male, legal immigrant, X generation, mestizo, many other things, right? The positionality and the subjectivity also has to do with, well, I have 20 years of training on the West. I have 3 master's degree. I have a JD. I'm finishing my PhD. So talking about being Western educated, right? As I say, I'm a lawyer. So there's a lot of things that I kept into account, but I'm not going to go into those details unless you want me to. And of course, I'll be more than happy to continue addressing those. So that's the methodology. How did I collect the data? It took me 17 months to collect data. I reviewed 80 programs, which was a problem because I was not going to be able to do a dissertation out of reviewing 80 programs. So for those 80 programs, I had to go back and forward, figuring out how am I going to decide which programs I'm going to choose. So using CGT, I went in a dialectical process, back and forth, and with the help of my committee, for sure, I came up with 3 exclusion criteria. First, I was going to review only organizations that had a formal program. Second, that program had already graduated a cohort or was very close to graduating a cohort. That second part I had to add because there were programs that because of COVID, even though they had the longevity, were not able to finish because of COVID. So I said, okay, if you are 3 months away of finishing, I will consider that you are old enough program. Collaboration was big. Even though, as I said, my research was documentary, I contact every single organization to validate my understanding and the information. And there were a few organizations that say, no, we don't want to participate with you, especially when they saw that my email came from CIIS. They got a little suspicious. Oh, you're coming from a competitor's program. You just want to know our secrets. So I chose only programs that were willing to collaborate with me, and some collaborated more than others. And finally, the program had to be at least 160 hours of educational training. To those 160, so I got 14 programs for that. To those, I add CIIS, that is just below that. Used to be 160, now it's just below that. So I added CIIS, both because it's an emblematic program and it's my alma mater, and I love the program. I was part of that program at some point as a mentor. And I also included MAPS, because again, it's iconic in so many ways as one of the most ambitious programs for trained psychedelic therapists, right? Now, the analysis then began. How am I going to evaluate these programs? I had to come up with integral metrics, but also metrics that were objective enough to apply to all programs. So doing a lot of thinking and a lot of research, I came up with 3 different metrics. The first one, body, mind, spirit. The second one, that many of you may not be that familiar because it's something very dear to CIIS, Sri Aurobindo and Haridas Chaudhuri triadic principle of uniqueness, relatedness, and transcendence. That is sometimes easier to understand as intrapersonal, interpersonal, and transpersonal. And then Ken Wilber's four quadrants moments, right? The 4 quadrants, as you probably go just to see the subjective, the objective, the intersubjective, and the interobjective. And apply these metrics to each one of those 16 programs. And I want to give you an example because this is very heady again. How does that look like? So this is an example of how the metrics look like. I reviewed every single program, and I first gave to the body, mind, spirit a letter code. So when you see in that presentation, M's is for mind. So you can see in this example, there's a lot of M's, M. Then you have a body, a red one for body, well, in this case is red, but a B for body and an S for spirit. And then I made a graph for that, which is the one. Okay, let me use this. Sorry, I forgot the laser point. Can you see the little dot?
Yes.
Okay, so this, as you can see, this program is heavily focused on mind. I'll say more about that. Then for the uniqueness, related, and transcendence, I use color codes. So red was from uniqueness, green was for relatedness, and red and blue was for transcendence. And again, in this example, you can see both here in the pie and here that this has very little emphasis on uniqueness and transcendence. So that's what I did. Then I applied the 4 quadrants metrics. I got all the contents of the program and classified it in the quadrant that I believe corresponded from these 4 in subjective, objective, and so on and so forth. And to that, I created a graphic representation so we can easily see for each program which is the dominant quadrant. In this quadrant is the lower left, but it changed from program to program. That was the first step. Then I start doing the coding, and I'm not going to read all those numbers, just to give you a sense that I start with a lot of information, and from there to this dialectic process, I went to open codes, focus codes, and then got the preliminary categories. Then I did something that in CGT means theoretical samplings, which is you review what you have, the codes, and then you start seeing, okay, what am I missing? What am I missing? And whatever is missing is the lit review focus on those things that the programs themselves were not able to provide me. So I had a delayed literature review, and I can say a lot about why I delayed that lit review. And in that one, I include the complexity of the experience, principles of integral meditation, transpersonal principles, and so on and so forth, to get a clearer sense of what was literally telling us that the programs were lacking. So to put it in simple terms, I was not just trying to put together what all the programs did and put it together into a smorgasbord. I was actually putting it together, following CGT in order to find something better. So in other words, the metrics plus the coding plus the literature gave me the final robust categories that I'll present in a moment. Something that constructivist grounded theory, CGT, talks a lot. Oh, by the way, Judy, this might be a good time for you to share the document with them if you didn't already. Sorry to forgotten that. I prepared a document for you to have some reference to this. So as I was saying, all of these created categories. Constructivist grounded theory invites you to keep working and reworking the codes, the open codes, the focus code, the categories, and go back and forward. So I'm not going to share with you. That's the painstaking part that Devashish mentioned. But I just want to show you very briefly all the different ways in which I play with the data. I made funnel charts. I put it in context of operation. I did world clouds, map minds, heat maps, all sort of way of working with the documentation. All of this is included in the dissertation, obviously, trying to really, really go deep into what was happening and how could my theory better answer the problem that I presented to you. So this is the time for a drum roll, because I am going to present you now the integral blueprint, or in terms of CGT, the emergent theory. I'm going to present you only the 15 categories. I'll show you the rest as well. But as you can see there, it's complex. 15, 60, 265. It's a lot to digest. But let's start with the categories. So first we have what I like to call the bedrock. Not even the foundation, the bedrock. This is basic knowledge that they need to have. And notice there that something that you're going to notice in the IBP, the integral blueprint, is that the sequencing is very careful and very strategic. Everything is in a careful position in a specific place, because I want to make sure that people know what they're getting into, know what they're learning, know how to apply them. So the bedrock includes self-exploration, obviously fundamental knowledge, history, background, all of that. But then we jump right into self-development. And we start with self-development, which is something that very few programs start with. Then we talk about equity and inclusivity. That, again, something that sadly not all the programs include, or at least don't include with a lot of that. Some do really well, particularly universities do this very well, but private organizations not go so deeply into that. And then we move into the transpersonal. And you're going to see me, or you're going to see the IBP dancing around in an iterative form with this concept: self-development, equity, and transpersonal. So that's the first four. Then we move to the next four, which is what I call the foundation. And here you have what you really need to know: legal, ethics, shamanic. Notice that shamanic is before medical, to try to balance the Western emphasis on the medicalization of psychedelics, something that has been criticized and named. So shamanic approaches, medical information, and only after that, we go into the medicine. Notice that we're halfway through, and only now we begin to talk about medicine and compounds. And we work from there, right? The next set is what I like to call the applied knowledge. Notice that it took us more than half of the program to start teaching people how to sit with people. This is very important. I don't want any student to believe, oh, I think I'm ready to sit with someone there. No, we're going to wait until you have got really strong in the bedrock in your foundation. And then we start talking about the applied knowledge. And remember, this is for therapy. So we talk about mental health. Then we talk about number 10, which all programs cover: preparation, management, skills, interventions, tools. In number 10, you also have, in management, we also have the actual session and integration. So this is where we get into all of this. Then we have a capstone that is number 14, that is basically a way to go back and revision all of this. It's almost like a case study or cases study, like the case method. We go back and we review every single one of them. And based on that, we see, oh, you're not very clear on this. Let's go back and work on that, or whatever it is. And because this is an integral blueprint, something that many programs lack or deal with different levels of emphasis is the areas of community, system, and planet. And we want to, again, going back to social justice, planet, stewardship, and so on and so forth. So this is a lot, but it gets better than this. So hold on to your seats. I'm just going to show you, we won't go into the details with it. I'm going to show you the whole 9 yards of what the IBP is. So just look at that. That is the detailed explanation of all those topics and all those components. And again, just to give you a sense, there's a lot of stuff there that it is my attempt to really get to know how to get this integral program. Now, I think that the IBP is pretty comprehensive, but of course, no research project is complete. There are always limitations, things that we could have done differently, things that didn't work really well, things that I suspect might be weakness of the program. So let me talk about those limitations quickly. The first one has to do with language. This is a problem always talking about psychedelics or integral anything. We're talking about ineffable situations, so this is hard. And the second part is that programs may use different labels to refer to the same thing. So some may talk about indigenous traditions and some may talk about ancient wisdom. That's an easy one. We can say, okay, they're probably talking about the same thing, but that's not always the case. So there is a risk that in me and in interpreting those labels, I may have not fully grasped what the program was all about. Lack of collaboration, I talk already about this one. There were some programs that opened the doors fully and gave me a lot of information. I'm very grateful to them. And there were programs that said, no, whatever is on the website, that's what you're going to get. That's all there is for you. So there is a limitation, is that for some program, I got more information, therefore, more likely I get them better than programs that didn't have that level of info. I didn't have access for that level of information. The next one is not just for my dissertation, it's for any use of CGT. CGT is co-constructed between the data, the researcher, and reality. So when reality changes, sometimes a theory does not apply as well anymore. And we know that reality is changing even now, right? With the Lycos debacle is changing reality. The way psychedelics are being seen, I don't think is that much to worry about, but reality is changing and it's changing every time. So that might be a limitation, weakness of my research. Another practical limitation is the integral blueprint is ambitious. So some people say, hey, maybe this is too much. Maybe this is not, and how are we going to put this into practice, right? Everyone thinks that their program is special. So I can imagine programs raising objections about the fact that, no, you should have not compared my program with these other programs. We are different in this way and that. And there's value on that. So that's a limitation. I'm not indigenous. I am mestizo, so there's some indigenous blood in my veins, but I'm not 100% indigenous. As I said, I was trained in the West. So in the back of my head, I was always asking, am I romanticizing this information? Am I exoticizing the contribution of indigenous groups? I have to be very mindful and accept that as a possibility. There are many ways to slice a pie. Reality is one, right? But there are many ways to understand it. So for example, when we talk about the human being, we can talk about body, mind, spirit. But then someone say, no, it's body, mind, heart, and spirit. And then someone say, no, it's body, mind, heart, soul, and spirit. Same pie, sliced differently. The IBP is just my best attempt into presenting something. It is clear that other researchers could have sliced the pies differently. And finally, integral is forever aspiration. Integral, we'll never find something that is integral and that's it, we're done. As reality changes, also we need to update our blueprints, and that's a problem for anything that attempts to be integral. And that leads me to the surprises. And remember, ding, 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 I said that when we get to surprises, we were getting closer to the end of me talking and talking and talking. So we're getting there. As I was saying, integral is slippery. It's hard to capture it. Probably is not to be captured. I spent 18 years at CIS, 15 years teaching at CIS, and every so often there was a conversation. What is integral? What does it mean to be integral? And in the dissertation, I go at long length about the different ways of understanding integral. The second one, which was a surprise for me, but maybe shouldn't have been, is that the strong gravitational pull of the West. Let me show you, in a moment I'm going to show you the graphs to see how much the Western viewpoint, the Western perspective is reflected in the 16 programs, every single one of them. So the mind, the intellectual aspect dominates. Remember that the gray aspect is the mind. So just notice these are the first 8 programs. And by the way, I didn't put the names in this presentation because this was about the data, not about saying this program is better than this other program. I was very clear from the very beginning that I was not there to appoint the best program there is. They're all wonderful, but just to say, let the data speak, and all these programs, all of them are focused on that. And also in the relatedness, remember, the gray has to do with intellectual understanding, intellectual knowledge, and relatedness has to do with anything, every aspect connected with the human interaction in the world. That's a big, big, big label. So it's not surprising that all programs are strong in that. When we talk about the 4 quadrants, we notice also an emphasis, slight emphasis in the upper right quadrant that has to do with scientific endeavors. So you can see 13 here, 21, 31, 14, 20. This one has a lot more. So different programs have different levels of balance. If we see this, the second half of 8, there's the same thing: dominance of mind, dominance of relatedness, and more variation in the will variable. I try again playing with the data to show this differently. When we present the data like this, you can see it even more clearly how mind is very, very prevalent in the 16 programs. The same things, perhaps even more so, when we apply the triadic principle to the programs. And again, when we look at the 4 quadrants, it's a little bit more balanced. You can see how upper right, the green one, is that, but we have some programs that are not that focused on the upper right, on the scientific aspect. So that's interesting, or I found that very interesting and surprising. Now, the real surprise to me, and I was kind of thinking, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it is what it is. We have to say it. The real surprise is that not even the IBP was able to escape from this gravitational pull. And this is huge, because if you think about it, I start with the question, with the clear intention to create a balanced blueprint for all these different aspects. And even there, I was not able to fully escape. It's way more balanced than any of the other programs, but still you find those level there. I'll show you that the same thing happens here. This is the content program. And again, you can see there's a lot more red and blue here, and you probably cannot see it there, but a lot more P's and S. Yes. But it's still not balanced. I can't think, hold on, let me go back a little bit. I think that there are some reasons for that. First, the IBP is designed for the West. So this may be one of the reasons why there is this emphasis on the intellectual. These are just theories. Second one, the IBP is a capstone for a Western PhD program. So probably that also is having an impact here. And finally, linear and writing, it's a very intellectual endeavor. So there are chances like I may not have been able to fully capture, even in the IBP, the richness of the spiritual and the introspective aspects, right? So anyway, I showed this already. And as I said, again, the good news is that when we apply the 4 quadrants, it's way more balanced. This looks good. There's an emphasis on internal for sure, but if you can see here, this is quite balanced. Now, there were more surprises. And here I'm putting together 2 somewhat contradictory ideas. First, don't compare apples and orange. They're different, right? And that's the idea here, because as I said, it was difficult to decide what to compare and how to compare. In the dissertation, I go at great lengths about all the false starts that I had about, hey, how about if I compare them like this? No, that's not going to work. How about if I use this way? It took a while to develop the exclusion criteria. But then the second part may be puzzling for you. The apple don't fall far from the tree. And what does that mean? Or apples don't fall far from the tree. That means that there's a similarity there. And this is the thing. On the one hand, programs are very different. And on the other hand, they're very similar. Different, I explain why. Similar, I just have to ponder, maybe because they're using the same literature. That's a possible answer about that. There's another that I happen to like more. If we believe in psychedelics, if we are, not believe, that's not the right word. If we take psychedelics and psychedelics experiences seriously, maybe all programs are drinking from the same fountain, the fountain of spirit. So who knows? The fact is that they're both similar and different. Next limitation, and I really push against this one. This one's something that really took me by surprise, big surprise. As you remember, I wanted to focus only in content, on the what to teach. But I realized that what to teach didn't make any sense if I didn't include sequencing, when to teach. As you saw when I presented the IBP, sequencing is as important as what to teach. When to teach something is very important about what to teach. To give you one example, we shouldn't teach people how to sit with clients if we haven't taught in detail law and ethics, right? To give you a simple example, there are plenty of them. The last surprise is something that I call the forgotten aspects, which were these 5 issues that were the one that were less or the least considered in the programs. And it was surprising. The intrapersonal, self-growth, the transpersonal, spiritual development, indigenous perspective, this kind of blew my mind. I thought it would have been different, but it is what it is. The body, but there's something important here. The body is mentioned often as, and studied to study the impacts, the effects of the psychedelic substances. They often forget that the body is a vehicle for change. So that's rarely included. And the relationship. Any psychotherapist knows that wounding happens in relationship and healing has to happen in relationship. Very few programs make emphasis in the value of the relationship. Getting there. Future research, very quickly, because there are a lot of this. The field is open, the field is new, so the sky is the limit in some way. So I'm trying to limit to whatever is related to training, psychedelic training, right? Can we implement the IBP in the real world? That's a big question. I'll be very curious for someone to take that mantle and see it applied in the real world. How can we adapt it to other approaches? How would it be to try to apply the IBP to an apprenticeship model? How would it be to use Waldorf or even Montessori approaches or liberational approaches and apply to the IBP? Very interesting. There's a big debate, I won't go into the details, but there's a big debate in the literature about the pedagogical value of personal psychedelic experiences. The literature is very clear in general. People that want to be guides need to have personal psychedelic experience. Most programs seem to agree with that, but there's a growing perspective of people that say, no, you don't. And the way I understood this is because we have two visions colliding. On the one hand, you have the psychological and including the shamanic perspective that said you need to have personal experience. Therapists need to go to therapy. Shamans need to have experience and establish a relationship with the plants and other beings in other planes of existence. So that's one. And in the medical aspect, there is this thing like a doctor can say, hey, wait a minute, I don't need to be diabetic to prescribe insulin. I don't need to have cancer to recommend for someone chemotherapy. So these two perspectives and tense, and there's currently the debate is, well, do we really need them for training guides? That would be an area for research. What's the role of the government and governmental agencies? As I said, when the government authorized psychedelics in Colorado and Oregon, programs rush into these places and they have to adapt their trainings to whatever those guidelines. But too many guidelines may strangle the program. So there's something to say where is going to be that level. Closely connected, what do we do with people? Some programs say this program is only for psychotherapists, assuming that they'll bring some specific knowledge that they can skip some stuff because they are psychotherapists already, right? So what would be the requirements of what should be prior knowledge? And this becomes even more important when most programs not only include psychotherapists, but they also accept nurses, and they also accept doctors, and they also accept social workers and clergy. So they have very different training. For example, doctors rarely talk about the transference and the countertransference that psychotherapists may be very familiar with. So what is that basic knowledge? The next one is, do we need specific types of training for a specific psychedelics, or one size fits all? Do we need to develop guidelines for working with psilocybin and then guidelines with working with peyote or working with ayahuasca? Or can we do it one size fits all? That different programs are answering that question differently. Another very interesting topic, and Susana and I spend a lot of time talking about this. Is it even possible? There's been a lot of attempts to bring together the shamanic and psychotherapy worldviews. And if so, how? And if not, can we let people know these two don't merge really well, or they merge here, but they have to remain separated here? There's a lot of research that needs to happen in this area, not only for psychedelics, but since psychedelics bring these three things together, it's important. Working with specific populations, working with people with certain illnesses, working with adolescents, working with mental illness, schizophrenia. There's a lot of things that still can be explored. Likewise, what do we need to train other professions? Nurses, probably not exactly the same as psychotherapists. Doctors, spiritual counselors, can we use the IBP for them? I don't think so. I think that there has to be some adjustment, but that's an area of research. What's the impact of new technologies, artificial intelligence, virtual reality in training psychedelic guides? There's some really interesting things going on in this field. Developing a multidisciplinary center. This is something fascinating. Bill Richards and Pankey back in 1966 suggested this idea. Maybe this idea finally is going to find its time, where you have not only training centers, but clinical centers, training centers, the whole thing working together with psychedelics. Spiritual development, it sounds fascinating to me. And then last one, the one that you can imagine, this thing about the pedagogy, right? We have addressed the what and the when. Now we need to address the how. The contributions, we're almost there, I promise. I don't see myself as a discoverer. I don't see myself as an explorer. Most modestly, I'm a map maker, right? My job was to systematize what is already out there. The IBP brings together these three rivers: integral education, path literature, and existing programs. So there's a lot of richness there. The IBP tries to balance, and I think that it does it to some extent, acquisition of knowledge. Every program talks about this, personal transformation and spiritual development. And because it's integral, it brings together all these different aspects: the ethical, the scientific, the social justice, the indigenous, all of that. Now, as I said, from the very beginning, what I call, there's the psychedelic renaissance, right? And I refer to the psychedelic, I forget the word that I used, birth, right? The moment when psychedelics were sort of rediscovered in the West. I forgot the word that I used in the program, funny. But even back then, there was a knowledge that people need to be trained. And let me add a quote from a very interesting guy that is talking about we need all these qualities. Even he knew that we needed training. And to his credit, he always expressed that this needs to be trained. There has to be clear guidance about what to train, but that never happened. Last slide. In closing, in the old days, maps used to love to include for terra incognita, paint dragons or sea monsters and different creatures, right? There's this urban myth that maps used to include these fake hic sunt dragones, here be dragons. The fact is that only one map includes that particular legend, but they do include monsters and dragons. And I believe that psychedelic-assisted therapy, we're going to face some dragons. There are some dragons ahead of us. Psychedelics are, in words of Rudolf, he was talking about the numinous, but I think that it is okay to say that they're a mysterium, tremens, and fascinant. Psychedelics are intriguing, intimidating, spellbinding, right? We just cannot resist them. Just think about it. Not even legal prohibition stopped us from experimenting with psychedelics, right? So there's something very intriguing about them. As tools, they can be very useful, but only in the right hands. Let me give you another example for this. Think about a blade. Depending on who's handling that blade, is going to have different impact. If the blade is in the hands of a butcher, a cook, a sculptor, or a murderer, he's going to have a different, very different use. So that's why we need people that know how to use psychedelics as tools. They're not silver bullets. We had to get rid of that myth of the psychedelics are like 10 years of therapy or one night. Yes, they help, but there are no shortcuts, and we cannot see them as shortcuts. Like fire or like a dragon, they cannot be mastered. We humans want to believe that we have mastered fire. Yeah, just look at California every fire season, right? We're never going to master fire. We're never going to master a dragon. But we can learn to work with it. We can learn to ally with them as long as we remain humble and alert. And my wish is that if we learn to do that, we may be able to listen to the healing message that psychedelic keep telling us, everyone, over and over. We are okay. We're loved beyond measure. Everything is unfolding as it should. When I finish my dissertation, I finish with one wish. That is my wish for you and wish for the field, right? May the long and winding road ahead of you be exciting, healing, interesting, and enriching. May this trip be a good one. So I invite all of us to move courageously, to walk courageously in this path, knowing that at least now there's a map to lead the way. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you, Sergey, for that nice kind of expansion of, or rather contraction of your very large dissertation. Thank you so much. I think you can stop sharing, Sergio.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I think now we'll move into the oral defense section, and I will request Bill Richards to start us off with kind of talking to you, questioning you, Sergio. And after that, I will request Susanna. So I think, Bill, you can ask one question or more. If you want to cluster some questions, that's fine. If you just want to ask one question, that's fine in the same area. And we'll proceed like that over one round, and then we'll come back and see a second round.
Well, Sergio, I guess the first thing I want to express is just gratitude for your discipline, scholarly diligence in all this. I'm struck with, in your thesis proposal, it was titled Toward a Integral Blueprint. And now we've arrived at an integral blueprint, okay? Like you've done, you'd think you were trained as a lawyer, actually, the way that you've dealt with this material. It is so refined and detailed and articulate and well-written. I look forward to it being condensed into an article that is significantly less than 584 pages that will contribute to the world out there. The topic is incredibly timely. Psychedelic therapy is really moving into the mainstream. Where I work in palliative care, that alone, if that gets moved into oncology centers throughout the world in the next few years, there will be a huge demand simply for people working with psychedelics in palliative care, not to mention all the other applications that invite new practitioners. If I were to ask you a question, I guess it would be, once again, even though you touched on it in your surprises, but what do you know now that you didn't know when you started? I'd value your reflections on that.
Yes, yes. So I start and perhaps unpack the surprises more. I was surprised to see that the intrapersonal and that's the first thing, that the intrapersonal and the transpersonal were not as clearly identified in the programs. I would have imagined that it was common knowledge that if someone wants to do this work, they have to do their inner work first. And many programs bypass that. And that was surprising. I was not aware that how much that is not kind of common knowledge. The same thing goes for the transpersonal. I had this assumption that because psychedelics open the door of the transpersonal, every program was saying, of course, we're going to train you into how to work with transpersonal states. And there wasn't. So that's something that I learned through my work and through the literature and all of that. I suspected it already. I knew it already in a way, but it just consolidated my deepening commitment to inner work and transpersonal work as part of it. Another big one would be indigenous traditions. It was sad, to tell you the truth, to notice how many programs from those 17 only included as a thought in historical. The ancient traditions used to have been using these substances or these plants for many years, right? But without even acknowledging, of course, this is, again, is one of those dull surprises, right? Because we should have known that the West doesn't tend to recognize the contribution of those places. So to me, that was a big one to realize that, no, this is real. This is not really happening. And that's heartbreaking to me. And the last one, if I can move a little bit away from the dissertation, is to, this is going to be so CIS, to learn to trust the spirit more. As you say, as a lawyer and as an academician, I try to figure out everything in my mind and try to put it in order. And sometimes what I needed to do is let go of the tiller. Let go of the tiller for a few days, or sometimes even a night, and opportunities appear, solutions came up, new codes that the night before were not there. Same, of course they were there, I just couldn't see them, but there was something about that. So this is a lesson that I learned. I learn and I forget every so often, Bill, but it is to trust the spirit, that there's something else going on, and I need to learn to trust it. Right? Thank you.
Sergio, here
Move
you
on to
are.
Susanna.
Gonna go next.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for all this big effort that you have made of putting all this together. It's just so much information. And I have two questions, and I think I'm gonna start with the second question, which you already know about. But one of the things that I'm missing a little bit in your presentation, not a little bit, a little, is like focusing on the blueprint itself, like getting, you showed us like the 15 topics. I'm very curious, and I imagine that, like people who are here too may be very curious about the contents, of information of the contents that you came up with, in that way. So you've mentioned them, but like more specifically, the results. But since I read the dissertation, I know the topics, and since your goal is for others to use this blueprint to create new programs that are more integral, based on everything that you know, your academic background, your immersion in the topic, what you have come up with, with these results and stuff, how would you put a program together? And I know this is a very big one, based on your blueprint.
Yes, we talk about this one, and it's been in my head, and I was kind of hoping that you were not going to ask it, because it is a big question, but you mentioned it, so it's only fair. So first, the goal of the just to be clear, and you know this, but for the group to know, the goal of the dissertation was not to put it into practice, right? I said that's for programs to decide. That's for, and depending whatever is available, depending where is going to be applied, this is going to be change. I knew from the very beginning that I'm just a humble PhD student at CIS, right? Nobody's going to say, oh, Sergio's blueprint, let's apply just like it is. Nobody's going to do that. I see the blueprint as a springboard from where different organizations, different universities all over the world, I'm going to tweak it and change it and adapt it as they need. But you're asking me about what would I do? And to answer that, I'm just going to assume for a moment that time is not a problem and money is not a problem, which are big problems, right? And those are probably the main problems that a program needs to decide. When a program decides to move from 250 hours to 160 hours, is not because they want to make their program worse. Nobody said, let's make our program is really big, let's make it little, not that great. It is because they have financial constraints, because they have time constraints, we have reality constraints, right? But I'm going to assume that that is not the case, because I've been thinking a lot about it. So first, I think that I would make a program that, depending if it is, I did a lot of thinking about this, you know me. If it was a full-time program, it would be a sort of a 3-semester program. But most of the program in this field are not full-time. Most of the people in the field are either doing weekend programs or something similar because they have another job, right? So then say, okay, I'm familiar with in ICP, there's a weekend program. So I say, okay, I can use that as an idea. How would it be if I can only do it during the weekends? Then that turns into almost a 2-year program, which, let me say, is not the longest out there, the longest program out there. There's a program that is 3 years long. So I'm not being exaggerated on that, but it's in the longish part. and I would split it in two tiers. There would be like the beginner's tier and the advanced tier. Also think in terms of practicality, right? So it would be, so people could become a technician in psychedelic therapy if they only do tier one, but the goal to be whatever, certified or get the degree or whatever it is in psychedelic assisted therapy, they would need to do the whole thing. Some idea. I would put a lot of emphasis in retreats. I would do ideally one retreat a semester, perhaps even two, ideally about a week long, because a lot of stuff happens in a retreat, right? Not just, we can do a lot of teaching in a retreat, but you can also have expanded state of consciousness experience. How would it be to do shamanic drumming during a retreat, and then do holotropic breathwork in a retreat, and then do ketamine, and then if legality permits it, you can do mushroom. And in every retreat, you are building upon their understanding on psychedelics, and you're also using the time to do group work, which is one of the best ways to do intrapersonal work is in a group, because you get to know how others see you, right? I did a lot of work with T-Group, with group dynamics. So I would use the power of the group to enhance the self-exploration part. I would invite a lot of, I would invite indigenous healers whenever possible from different traditions, because again, I don't want to say, oh, I'm going to teach you about the whatever tradition, right? Who am I to teach it? I can teach from the head, but I'm not a member of that lineage. So I would invite people from those lineages to teach about that. And if possible, I'm really, really thinking ambitiously here, I would do pilgrimages. I would take them to Wirikuta in Mexico. I would take them to the Mount of Adoration in Oaxaca, and so on and so forth, right? So it would be a really, to create that integrality. There are a whole bunch of things else that I could do, but I hope that gives you a sense of what I would do if it was on me to organize such a program.
I just wanted to add that you know, if we think about your 15 topics, you know, what you're proposing may also expand those.
It's possible, yeah. It's part of the malleability. The IBP is never meant to be like, this is it, right? Just do it and you're right. No, it has to be adapted. It has to be regionalized. It has to be modified. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Susana.
Thank you. Sergio, so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the method you use to get to the 15 criteria. And you mentioned using constructive grounded theory, which is accepting what exists on the ground and trying to make the data speak. So as you said, you use the data, and from that you derived certain things, categories that exist right now. And then you talk about a delayed lit review, and you also start with comparing these various offerings to what you call your metrics, which are the three ways in which you measure them against theories of the integral, right? So now you have three different things. You have a constructive grounded theory where you're actually looking at what people do. You're measuring them against something that you already call integral, and you also have a lit review. How do the three work together? And are you not, in that case, developing something that doesn't necessarily exist out there, you know, based on, I mean, a kind of a variety of methods that you're adding together?
Yes, that we talk about this, Devashish. The thing about the constructivist grounded theory, I chose it because for a bunch of reasons. The main being that when there's not enough, the topic of study is not well known. You want to let the data speak for itself, right? So that was one of the reasons, and also the fact that you keep going back to the data. There's an iteration over iteration, and you saw the graphs all the way, and you know all the ways. I was letting the data speak to me. To be honest with you, when I first started this project, I was not that clear about the CGT. So, and I really wanted, it just made sense in my mind. Let's start with the metrics, right? As I was learning about CGT, I was applying the metrics, and then I said, oh, maybe this is not part of CGT. Maybe I'm doing something different. But then I thought about it. You know what? The metrics was my way to interviewing the programs. I was not interviewing the programs, as CGT is famous for interviews. That's usually what is used the most. We actually had some conversations with Susanna. Hey, are you sure? Seemed to be the right method. And then to her credit, she pointed me to some literature that actually allows that. So to me, the three metrics was my way to interview the programs. So I start to getting to know each program, and then I start coding the information for those programs, and I got a lot of information. This over 2,000 data points of information from all the programs, the 16 programs. But then it became very clear, you know what, this is not enough. And I mentioned in the presentation, if I only do this, then what I'm going to have is just a mixture, like a smorgasbord of all the information from the program. This is not integral. This is not, there's no depth to this. So luckily for me, CGT has something this called theoretical sampling, which is once you've done your first categories and you have what I call the preliminary categories, then you start looking at them and say, where are the empty spaces? Where are the gaps? And then you lit review, and just for the audience, there's a lot of discussion in CGT whether lit reviews should be doing at the beginning or at the end, or after the data gathering. I chose to do it because I wanted to meet the data without the blinders of the lit review. So that's why I deleted it. And that was a really good idea, because through theoretical sampling, I start seeing, you know what, the programs are good in some aspects, but in some aspects are really empty. So my lit review was informed by those gaps, and there were things that came out of those interviews of the data. All the thing about the importance of ethics, right? The importance of ethics, it is included in all programs, but there was something missing, and the literature starts screaming to me, this is a big topic. There's a lot of abuse happening in the field. You need to go deeper into that. The same thing that I mentioned before in Bill's question about the indigenous traditions, right? The same thing about the experimentation with psychedelics, the direct experience. So the matrix and the data talk to each other, and then the lit review came and enriched that. So I think that I would love to say that I did something different, but to say I created a new method. But I think that CGT actually is broad enough to, with that combination, the theory did emerge from the richness, not just from the data, but from the actual combination of the data and the lit review. And of course, at that point, last thing about that is you go into what is there's a word in CGT that I forgot. You begin to use your experience at that level. Once you have all the data, once you have all the lit review, you start saying, okay, how does this make sense? And that's when you all the experience that you've been trying to put aside to memos. No, I shouldn't have any opinion about this. Put it aside. Put it aside. In this moment, you say, oh, how am I going to turn this bunch of data and opinions from books and literature? How can I turn this into a real theory? And that's where the sequencing kicks in. But I think that it is included into CGT when it's applied, as I hope I did, according to the method, right?
Yeah, thank you, Sergio. I think, I completely agree with you over there. I think CGT is often used in cases where there is no existing theory. So you're creating a theory from the ground up. You're actually, um, sampling something that you've discovered in a sense. But in your case, I think there's also a critique involved because as you were presenting it, that comes out as well. The fact that certain things are not being met or certain things are too heavy, certain directions are more Eurocentric or whatever. Those things are also coming out of the data, but unless you can critique it, you are, in a sense, you have to accept it as what exists. So I think,
Yes.
your lit review and your metrics were very helpful, and particularly for your purpose, for what you're trying to do. So I think I totally agree with you over there.
Mm, thank you.
So I think let's move again for another round, and I'll request Bill to come in case he wants to make any more comments and questions. And then again, Susanna.
Fine. I'm very aware of like two levels. On one hand, what are the requirements for initial certification for someone to start doing psychedelic therapy in a competent and ethical way? And then beyond that, there's no limit to learning in this field, And I've been, doing it for more or less for 61 years, and I'm still learning, okay? Every session I run, I learn something new almost, Um, so between our individual experiences and our collaboration with colleagues, the uh, wealth of knowledge keeps expanding and developing. And I think it's critical that therapists are linked with colleagues and um, are part of a community. Um, I think you've done a fine job. And you've accomplished what you set out to do and what we approved when we first looked at your proposal. And I would toss you the ball and encourage you to run with it.
The plan, Bill. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, Ron, I want to. Thank you.
Yes, Susanna, you had at least another question, right?
Yeah, I have. So when we talk about the data, you talked about the limitations of the data that you had, Sergio, extensively, and you talk also extensively in the dissertation itself. One of the questions that emerges for me is, okay, these are the contents of the different programs that you were able to access, right? Here we don't know, we don't talk about what happens in the classroom, as you also put in the dissertation. We're not talking about pedagogy, right? But I wonder, because I don't remember, I wonder if you considered the selection criteria for the people that were entering into these programs. What were the minimum requirements that had these programs deliver certain type of contents and emphasize some over others? And also, what are the outcomes? I mean, I completely agree with Bill. This is a field that is in growth, right? And we are always gonna be learning things, but there are minimum outcomes in the programs that may differ from one another. And that depends on what do I conceive of what a psychedelic assisted therapist should have after training. So my question basically is selection criteria and outcomes, were they considered when you did the analysis of the contents?
Mm-hmm. 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 It's an interesting question. So so again, as you said it very clearly, my goal from the very beginning was not to focus on pedagogy, right? And that's not your question. I'm clear. I just want to name that for the group, because that's the dissertation would have been 7 times longer if I tried to do that, because there's so many ways to teach content, right? But that's a tangent. That's not what you're asking me. When I began thinking about these programs, about an integral program, I said, you know what? I'm a psychotherapist, and there's a part of me, the psychotherapy part says, well, it actually makes sense that you limit the access to the program to people that are already psychotherapists. But in my work as a mentor and developing and helping other programs, very, very often I met people that say, you know what? I'm a traditional healer. I've been doing healing work for 30 years, but I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't have that Western credential that would let me to access your program. Or many others, right? Many examples. That's one example. Another person would say, well, you know, I've been doing even something holotropic breath work for 25 years, but I'm not a therapist. I was a lawyer. Hello, but I decided not to practice that. But I've been doing that. So am I not going to be accepted? So that was one, and the other one. I know plenty of therapists that even though they are trained as therapists, their training was really limited. I know for a fact therapists that were only trained in one approach of therapy. I can think of people that were just trained in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So if someone has, even though there may be a therapist, I'm nothing against cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's kind of a more narrow application of psychotherapy, right? I think it's very useful and very valuable, but it's narrower than other approaches. So I said, we have to level the playing field. Is that how you say it? Level the playing field? Yes. I mean, to start all at the same level, right? And that's why one of the topics for future research has to do with, well, maybe not necessarily. Maybe if someone is a doctor, they don't have to take the medicine module, right? But definitely they didn't need to take the legal one. But if someone is a lawyer, maybe not all lawyers are specialized in substances. Maybe you can skip that. So I said, you know what? Those are case-by-case situations. So let's start all of them at the same level. And then each program will decide if there's some specific criteria, and they will decide why would they'll need to justify that specific acceptance criteria. So that's I did think in depth about that. The topic of outcomes, to be honest with you, that's something that I should add to future research, because I didn't think about outcome. I was just saying, this is what needs to be learned. How are we going to evaluate that they actually accomplish that? I do include the capstone there. So that might be a place where you can, that's some of my way of thinking, is that's a place where you can check whether they have studied what they're supposed to study. Of course, there are many other ways in which you can evaluate outcomes or even describe outcomes. But I think that when I conceived the work and throughout the dissertation, that was beyond the scope that I had in mind. But that's like a very interesting topic of that would enrich significantly the IBP, right?
Exactly. So if you know what the outcomes of that sequence of contents that the programs show, right, like are, then you know why they are doing that in that sequence. So, and I imagine that there are different definitions, different understandings of what among the different programs about what a psychedelic-assisted therapist has to come out with after going through a program. So I think that could have enriched also the understanding of why certain contents.
You're absolutely right. And I'm thinking two things there. First, again, my eyes were not focused on that, so I didn't look very much there. But in some ways, the sequencing speaks to those outcomes. So we talk about social justice and equity and inclusion at the second level, and then we revisit it again, both because we want to make sure that they got it, and we want to go deeper. So the sequencing begins to, it's a beginning step in that direction. I didn't go that far, but it's a beginning step in that direction. And that's why I talk about bedrock and foundation, because you need to be able to move from here to here. So there is this building upon. So I think you have something, yeah, I'm going to keep thinking about that one. That's one. And the second one, just to mention it is included in the dissertation, but again, I was not looking in that direction. The Berkeley Academy came up with a wonderful document, wonderful, long document that I took into account for my research, that specifically talks about outcomes. So there's already, and I'm friends with them. So I made revisit this after this conversation with them. I work with Berkeley retreats. So we have some connection to see how can each enrich each other, right?
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have just a tiny other one, if that's possible.
Please, yes, absolutely, Susanna. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Debashish. We also talked quite extensively about the application of this blueprint in non-Westernized contexts. You take a few programs that are not Western programs, or I don't know where we would limit things in that way. What would be we're here where we are, right? Like, what is I don't know how to formulate this, but maybe what's the global application and the limitations of application of what you came up with, given the data that you had?
Yeah, that's a big question. Again, you said a little one, but not that little. I first, again, going back to the scope and the limitations of the program, it was thought, as you said, we're here, and it was thought to be applied in the US, not in the US, in the West. Having said that, I think that it would hold its ground pretty well in other latitudes, in other countries that use a similar system. For example, in a university in Mexico or Colombia, yes, you would have to change some of the, not the categories, but maybe some of the topics or the subtopics, the content at that level. Yes, example, if you talk about history, you probably will want to add, and we talk about that. I spoke at an event. Oscar, who is here, invited me to teach there. And I have to talk more about Mexico. I couldn't talk about just the developers in the Western world, because I have to emphasize that, well, Salvador Roquet did these things in Mexico, right? And Claudio Naranjo did this in Chile. So there, you have to adapt it to the country. But I think that the categories are solid enough to be applicable as a starting point in any Western education system. I remember at some point before going to CIIS, I wanted to go to India and study psychology in India. But I wanted to go in something that was both psychological and spiritual, and I couldn't find. There was either the university or the ashram. And so if the dissertation, if the IBP was to be applied in a university, even in India, I think that it would hold its ground really well. If you're trying to move it to something like an ashram, I don't know if you could do that, but you know what I'm trying to say. If we use an apprenticeship model, for example, then it would have to have significant adaptations. And that's why I include that as one of the very interesting areas of research, right? How about if you apply liberation approaches to the IBP? How about if you apply even Montessori? I don't know if that's ever been done, or the Waldorf method to this. That would be a really interesting way of saying, how would this hold on those methods? But again, it was not conceived for those methods. So it's in some ways like saying, would a Lamborghini work well in a all-terrain race? Maybe, but we probably need to change the tires because otherwise it's not going to work. It was not designed for that. I just call the IBP a Lamborghini. So I just noticed that it was not designed for that, but I think it could work. But you will need to make those adaptations. Right?
Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. I think both the questions you raised were very interesting and important ones, and also sparked off something as I was reading Sergio's dissertation, similar on similar grounds. Firstly, on the issue of preparation of the whoever's admitted, the people admitted to the programs. And as Sergio was talking about leveling the playing field, that you start with no assumptions. You start with anybody who wants to enter and see what it is that would constitute a legitimate integral blueprint. I think that was one of the questions that continued in my mind. One was that talking about grounded theory, the kind of 16 or so institutions that you're looking at, they all really have some criteria for admission. Do any of them have a completely open criterion? That's a good question to think about. And then I think I like what you said about different tiers or levels, because there is the question of time. And, I mean, if you're expecting somebody with already, preparation, and here it's not just medical preparation, but it's actually skills that people are bringing into the picture. That's partly why most CPTR, for example, or most of these schools already expect you to be a therapist, a licensed therapist. We had the same thing in our department with spiritual counseling, if you remember, Sergio. And we've recently kind of taken off that bar. Now it's open to everybody, but we had to redo the curriculum, as it were, add new things. It's become longer as a result. So I think a question of discussing what the transition means, if you take the bar out, what does it mean in terms of time and the degree of preparation needed? I wonder whether you want to say anything about that.
Yes, it's a big and complicated question. You are right. Every single program has acceptance criteria, right? There has to be, right? I remember I was helping design a program at some point, and part of the answer to Susanna as well. And we started meeting with people that didn't have any training, right? Especially if you want to open, if you don't want to be discriminatory, you have to at least give them the opportunity to apply, right? And the credentialing is a very Western way of making, well, at least there's a level playing field. All of you know the same thing, so we can start from that up. And as I said, and as I know, and you also know, that is not always the case. Not all doctors are trained equally. Not all nurses are trained equally. That's why they're different universities, and different universities have more or less reputation and success and all of that. So there's something to be said about, even though it's a very practical way of saying, we can skip all the basic principles of psychotherapy if we only take psychotherapies, right? Maybe, but it's a risk. So what I imagine there, in order to do that, and then we've seen in Oregon programs that went the other way, because the government, and going back to the government roles, the government said, in order to become a psychedelic-assisted therapy, you need to do a training and have a high school diploma. And it was like, it went to the other side. of the equation, right? I mean, on the one side, you have to be a psychologist and have a license and be, not only have the studies to be licensed, and on the other side of the equation, high school degree, that's enough. So I think that what we need to have is a basic set of rules, and I didn't go there, right? You need to know how to read. Yeah, you need to know how to write. Without those, it's going to be really hard for you to do this program, right? To be very, very simple. But then I think there's also this element of personal interviewing, or finding some way, okay, going back to my example of someone that has 30 years of experience as a traditional healer. Okay, so maybe you know more than I do about this, but we're still going to interview and say and notice where you are, not only in your intellectual knowledge, but in your personal development, and why not in your spiritual development. Of course, these are things that are very difficult to evaluate, but I think that those things need to be into account, because the fact is, and this is going to sound very presumptuous in a way, but not everybody should be a psychedelic therapist, right? Just as the guy that I presented in the slide, just because you want to be a psychedelic therapist doesn't mean that you get to be one. You need to go to the training, but you need to have certain level of maturity. You need to have certain level of personal development, and you have certain understanding of your inner work. So I think all those factors, again, that goes more, is outside of the scope of the dissertation, but those are very important aspects to take into account. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sergio. The other issue also was very interesting and important, which has to do with the non-Western, academies of this kind. And I really like what you said about the fact that the kind of knowledge academy is universalized. It's the Western knowledge academy that you encounter wherever you go. But this is of course true, and also not entirely true. And, depending on where, there is just the fact that CIIS exists, there's a certain amount of give and take. There's a certain flexibility to the standards. So other places also, the same thing applies, that there are degrees to which indigenous knowledge comes into these academies, wherever you go. So one of the things related to that with your presentation and your dissertation, Sergio, is that the 16 institutions that you chose, there was one real outlier. And that's the only non-Western one, actually. That's the one that's in Colombia.
Yeah.
And that's way out of the league of the others. It's much bigger, much longer. It gives master's and doctoral degrees. And, it's so. I was thinking, yeah, you've clubbed them together and you've used it along with all the rest to derive your categories. But don't you think that something special needs to be considered about the fact that A, they are non-Western, and B, they are a kind of a different league altogether?
You're absolutely right. And yes, you're right. It's the only non-Western program. There were others, but they didn't comply. For example, there's a Brazilian one, but it's so new that it didn't meet the criteria, right? So you're raising a really important point, that program is the one, and it's also it's an outlier in many ways. Not only that one, but one possible explanation is precisely because it's not so Western. On the other hand, that same program, when it comes to some of the criteria, when you look at the metrics, it's very strong in some categories, but then it's a little weak on the others, right? For that very reason. So I think that has to do with the vocation of the program, with the people putting the program together, where they are presenting their interest. There are programs that are very heavy in the medical aspect, and there are programs that add that as a optional topic. Oh, if you are interested in the brain and the neurotransmitter, you can take this additional course, but it's not even a part of the program. So there's something about that different perspective of how you hold the medicine, right? The reason, when I was choosing trying to define a selection criteria, one of those explanation, one of the criteria, well, maybe I'm going to do it by country, but the fact is that there are very few programs that I know of outside of the West and mostly outside of the US that are, at the time that I was doing the research, that were I could have considered it. There's a Canadian program, which is the other outlier. There's a Swiss program that is not so much an outlier, but is one older, and there are a few more. But we're talking mostly, it's a very, except for the Swiss program that has been there since 1985 or something like that, they're all very, very new. And the rest of the world is catching up. And hopefully they will look at something as the IBP and say, well, this is useful, but now we need to add all the stuff that has happening in Chile or that has happened in Nepal or wherever it may be, and to enrich it even more so. And there might be things that say this is not so applicable for us. So
thank you, Sergio. So I think before we break out as a group, I'd love to hear some of the audience as well. So maybe we'll take a few questions from the audience for you, Sergio. Maybe the first three questions, if anybody wants to, ask a question to Sergio. Yes, Philip, please go ahead.
Hi. So my question, I think your dissertation is great. I really enjoyed what I've seen, and I would love to get my hands on the dissertations. And my question is, and because of abuses, did you consider to include material on how people can stay a guide, like some sort of regulatory board? Because we have seen that people that have been guides for a long time, sometimes they just they kind of go crazy or go beyond the boundaries of ethics, and there are sexual aggressions from shamans and from Westerners. So is there something in your dissertation that says, hey, you gotta have, not only do you become a guide, great, you have passed our test, great, but what is there to make sure that those people stay in the lane?
Yes, Philip, thank you for the question. It's a very important topic. I'll give you two answers, the short and the long one. The short is no, I didn't include anything about how to keep their whatever certification, license, whatever, because that was not the goal of the dissertation. The goal was, how do we train them? And I think that the next step, that's another for future practice, how do they keep how do we keep them accountable, right? What I did do, and it was one of those big topics that took a lot of time. Oh, there's some. Okay, one of those topics that really took a lot of emphasis was, because of all those abuses, because of all those situations, I put a lot of emphasis in the need for not just the legal is there, right? The legal is there. We don't have to work. Someone is, yeah. Okay. So the legal aspect is there, but the ethical, I spent a lot of time in the dissertation, and I hope you read it once we're done with this. A lot of topic on the importance of ethics, inner ethics that come from within. And they're related, very connected with the introspection work, the self-exploration work, because usually those guides, those facilitators that violate boundaries is because they're responding to inner stuff that has not been healed. So I put a lot of emphasis in the importance of doing inner work. Going back to Bill's question, we need to make sure of that. And even more, not even more so, but also we need to create accountability bodies and support bodies, because it's very easy to demonize the person that violates somebody's boundaries, and they should be they should be what's the word? It should be addressed. They should be addressed. But there's also the aspect of, how do we support them? These are wounded healers. How are we going to support them? So again, to repeat, I didn't include that because that was the next step. First we train them, and then we decide how do I keep them. So that's the next step. And yes, I did spend a good chunk of the dissertation talking about the importance and the value of ethics, accountability, and support, mutual support. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Anybody else?
Hi, Sergio. I have a question for you. We're living in an era that artificial intelligence is very among us every day. We can use ChatGPT to ask whatever we want. Do you think that we can use this kind of technology in your field of expertise?
Yes. The answer, Jorge, is I don't know. I included it as one of the areas. I think is one of the most fascinating areas for future development is both artificial intelligence and virtual reality. Going back to the question of one of the big questions, as I said, is the question about personal experience, right? Should people have take psychedelics before being a guide? So in my fantasies, I imagine that maybe we could recreate in some way an artificial scenario through sensory deprivation or stimulation, sensory stimulation, where people, without having to take psychedelics, could get access to psychedelic experiences. When it comes to artificial intelligence, I'm not sure at this point how could that be applied to this directly. I know that there are ways in which artificial intelligence is being used in psychotherapy to expedite diagnosis and expedite treatment plans. So I can imagine feeding all of that into a ChatGPT type of system and help a person to go about diagnosis and treatment, integration even. But I think that we still, or maybe I'm just old, right? But there's also still the element of the relationship. And I think we are not yet at the level of the relationship, being able to have that relationship with ChatGPT in that way. Although we're getting there and things are going to change. That's why I included, this is an area of curiosity for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Mays.
Hello, Sergio. I know that you have suffered greatly in producing many hundreds of pages, but as a former librarian, I know there are tens of thousands of beautiful dissertations moldering in libraries, or at least moldering online. I wonder if you have any plans to make some sort of public condensation of this wisdom so that the people who are planning psychedelic trainings of all kinds would benefit from your effort.
Thank you, Chris. Not next week. The answer is yes. In some ways, I hear exactly what you're saying, and it's a big concern of mine. Any dissertation is as useful as how many people read it, right? Or get to know about it. And this one in particular, on the one hand, is mine, so I'm very partial about it. But I think that if people don't get to know about the existence of this blueprint, it's totally pointless. It becomes an exercise in, okay, I got a degree. How did you get a PhD? By doing this. Oh, has everybody ever using it? No, nobody. So it's kind of it would be a waste of time. So I'm trying to figure out, and I'm open to suggestions. How can I make it available? Because at the end of the day, it's service. Like I said, I don't expect anyone saying, oh, this is Sergio's trademark psychedelic therapy blueprint, right? It's more of, I want people to grab it, to use it, and apply it any way they want. So yes, I plan to synthesize it in an article. Some people have suggested the idea of turning it into a book. I don't know whether that's feasible because it's very technical in some ways, but that's that idea. I'm open to talk with anyone, anywhere, at any time about this, because as you can see, I deeply feel that this is important, and I want to share this with the people. I want it to be useful. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Sergio. Last question right now is from Isabel. Please go ahead.
Hi, Sergio.
Isabel.
Congratulations. I'm so excited for you, and thank you for putting this amazing work together. One question that I have that I've always wondered about, and it's an ongoing and continuing challenge, is how to bring in more of the indigenous voices, more of the traditional knowledge into this type of teaching, since so much of it is, indigenous teachings rely so much on oral tradition and on contextual, cultural mores and ways in which people understand reality. The cosmovision is specific often to the culture. So translating things directly doesn't necessarily make sense. It needs, in a way, to be embedded into the culture or doing embedded work within the culture. So I'm curious if you have had some thoughts about how could this be accomplished to help people understand not just the wisdom of the elders in this medicine work, but also how this wisdom can be translated into Western ways of working.
Yes, yes. That's a huge question, right? And I mentioned it as area of future exploration, because to me, it's still an open question. Mm-hmm. And I think that much of what has happened in the past, I don't want to say all of it, because that would be unfair, is that we're not sitting with them, I'm referring to them as the indigenous groups, with the level of respect that they deserve, right? There's always a little bit, well, we're going to learn, oh, how cute, right? These ancient traditions, we're not sitting with them at the table as equals, where we can learn from them and they can learn from us. Because we can also teach them things, but that's not your question. I think that we have not even figured out how to sit on the same table, in the same table together. And there are very good reasons for that. Some of them is the historical abuses of the West. These traditions are as novel and beautiful and kind as they are suspicious of the West, and rightly so. And in the other way around, like I mentioned before, the cosmologies, as you said, they're so different, right? Mm-hmm. So if there's still an open question whether this can come together, or what we need to have is an ongoing dialogue, just like you would have two doctors, right? Because, oh, so how do you do this type of operation? Well, I do this and this and that. Oh, that's really interesting. It's probably a terrible example. I'm not a doctor. But how do you do that and learn from each other? I think that what we need to have first is a dialogue. I think that is erroneous and perhaps even disrespectful to try to assume that we can just capture whatever they're doing and just turn it and apply it in the West, because the assumptions are different. The way they heal, they don't talk about pathologies, right? They talk about imbalances. Even that, from the very beginning, we're talking from very different perspectives. So we need to sit down and say, you know what? Your perspective is not better nor worse than mine. It's older, but let's see if we can learn from each other and learn to apply that together. I think and that's the beginning. That's just the beginning, because then we can invite them and perhaps visit them, because if it is a balanced relationship, it has to go both ways, right? Let's say, tell us about what you do. And perhaps, as I said to Susanna's question, maybe I'm going to visit you in your place to see how you do things, with the understanding that it's never going to be the same, but we go humbly and learn from them and the way they do it. And hopefully we create such a level of trust that they can come back to us and say, hey, how are you doing that thing that you do? Because my method doesn't work so well where certain forms of inflammation. Oh, well, let me tell you what we do, right? So there would be kind of a little dance. I think that's the farthest we can get at this point, but I think it's an open question, and it's a fascinating one for them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Isabel, and everybody. I think, Judy, at this point, if you can put the three of us, Bill, Susanna, and me, into a breakout room, and the rest of you can continue to talk to Sergio. while we deliberate among ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Rooms are open for you to go in. So yeah, we can continue to have the discussion here. And I don't know if you want to unmute Pooja or if you want me to read your comment, but there's a comment from Pooja.
I haven't been reading the comments for obvious reasons.
I can read them. So I'll read
Okay.
you her comment. So she says, thank you for the work, the presentation, and the conversation. While listening to the conversation, I wondered if building a set of competencies for PD guides with IBP would help bridge the gap between whether a traditional healer needs training and also if a traditionally trained psychotherapist is close to being ready.
That's a really great idea. And as I mentioned before, I think that the Beckley Academy has somewhat already gave the first step in that direction. The Beckley Academy did something very different. They have a program, but the program is too short for access to qualify for my 16 programs. But they very recently, as a matter of fact, I have to tell you, I was kind of worried that they were going to present it right before they presented right before I was to submit things. So I had to go back and change it. But they actually wrote a set of competencies more than anything that a person needs to be able to do this and this and this and that. So in that way, I agree with your comment that yeah, that's one way of going about to determine who gets to have, and some of those are very difficult, right? Some of those are very obvious. But some of those are very subtle because we're talking about subtle realms, the psychological, the psychic realm. But it's a good starting point for sure. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? You can raise your hand or unmute.
Hi, Sergio. I'm so glad to been able to catch this. So exciting that you made a 600-page dissertation. And I just want to say that my idea for my dissertation has an idea of a map. And I'm hoping that you will be open to sharing some of your knowledge of how to do that. It's just amazing what you've done. And I took copious notes. And I think there's pedagogy in what you did that's going to be useful for others. So thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you for being here. Yes, I wrote a lot and I learned about maps, right? And what are maps good for and what are maps not good for, and so on and so forth. The maps is not the territory. I just kept repeating to myself, the map is not the territory, right? Sometimes we fall in love so deeply with our creations. I said, this is it. And then realize, no, reality is different. And we need to go back to that reality. And what does it even mean to have a map? How abstract a map has to be. When I had the 15 categories, after working for months and months with those categories, as you saw in so many different ways, I say, well, maybe I should go even further. Maybe I should turn it into 4 categories, right? Whether it's the 4 quadrants or something like that. But then I realized, or I read somewhere, you know what? If you have a map of the United States, it's wonderful, but it's not going to help you find a coffee shop in your neighborhood. The map needs to be at the level of abstraction of what you need it for. And that is something that you say, okay, so I'm going to stay with these 15 because these 15 are clear enough for any program to apply, but not too abstract. That is, for example, I could just say, well, the program has to talk about intrapersonal, interpersonal, and transpersonal. Well, thank you very much. That is not going to help any university to put it into practice, right? There has to be that level, but there's a lot of that. My respect for map making has increased significantly. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm grateful that you're here.
And we have another question from Tiger. Am I saying that right? Yeah.
You're saying that right. Yes, Tiger. Sergio, I was going to just address you apart from this, but why not say in front of everyone? I'm so proud and impressed with you as a man from Mexico who has come into this Western hubris and brought this through. And I am trying to just bring recognition to everything that's here, this idea of training, and as if it's somehow superlative in some way, to what has been happening in the indigenous world as apprenticeship for centuries. I want to know how you look at apprenticeship as opposed to training. How conceivably would that be incorporated into your mapping, into your, I think it's called the IBP. How would apprenticeship be brought into that in your dream? I mean, I know this is taking you outside of your dissertation scope, but I'm just curious about that. And I just want to say congratulations, Sergio.
Thank you, Tiger. And I'm grateful that you're here. You can tell that I've been too many years in the United States when I start turning things into acronyms, right? That means that I've been too long in the United States. That is, as I mentioned, that is one of the open questions as well, because the apprenticeship model, which is, by the way, and you know really well, the model that has been used by the shamanic practices for ages, it's a very powerful model. It's a very, very useful model. It's not a model that is easily, as you know also very well, it's not a model that is easily translated into a Western style of training, because it's more time consuming. And it's a beautiful relation. Whether it's the Guru Kala in India or whether it's the apprenticeships with shamans in the jungle, there's something about their relationship. There's something about sitting in the dissertation. When I study that when I talk about that, I say sitting elbow with elbow with your teacher, right? And eating together and having discussions. And there's something that your teacher says that is perhaps not even a teaching moment, and you say, "Oh, that's the way she does it," right? And so there's something very beautiful about it, that it doesn't fully connect with the Western model so far. That's why I said this is an area of exploration, because I think it would be possible, perhaps some way, to experiment ways of bring this together, right? What the closest thing we have in the West, in my experience, and perhaps some of you can correct me if I'm wrong, has to do with the mentorship. Mentorship is supposed to have that element of apprenticeship, but is far from it, right? Because you mentor, you see it every so often, once a week, twice a week, I don't know, but it's not that level of intimate connection that you have with that. When I read about what happened in India, for example, it's so beautiful. It's almost like I say, I want some of that, right? I want to learn that way. But I think that's an open question. So I don't think I'm giving you any good answer. We'll have to sit down with a cup of coffee and discuss that a little deeper. And I know you've been exploring that topic, and I'm curious to learn more about it. But as far as it is, it's an open question. Thank you, Tiger.
So, Sergio, we are back, and I have to say to you that all three of us felt that we wanted to applaud what you have done. The tremendous amount of work and the style and the kind of rigor with which you've laid it out, the conclusions that you've come to, and your presentation. And so we have no hesitation in declaring you Dr. Sergio Rodriguez-Castillo. We approve your dissertation, we approve your presentation. So for the dissertation, you and I will talk, and maybe some very small tweaks, very minor tweaks, but we approve of both of them, and we have no hesitation in declaring you Dr. Sergio Rodriguez-Castillo.
Oh, thank you so much, Devashis, Bill, Susanna. Thank you, everyone, for your applauses and all of that.
Doctor.
Thank you. Ooh, it feels good. I feel like, I don't know if crying or just collapsing on the floor.
After the marathon,
Sergio.
right? collapsing in exhaustion, right?
Yes, yes, after the marathon. Yes, yes.
Sergio, integration.
Integration. Yes.
Congratulations, Sergio.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. It's been a wonderful experience. I couldn't think, I mean, probably everybody said so, but I mean it. Couldn't have had a better group of committee members. I fought to get you, and I'm happy I did, because it's been great to have you, and I've learned so much from each one of you. So
Thank you, Sergio. It was a pleasure and really a great pride to be the chair of your committee.
Thank you, Devashish.
Agradezco mucho las conversaciones. I really love to speak in Spanish with you when we had our meetings as well. This is what I'm saying. Learned quite a bit. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Doctor.
Gracias, 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 gracias. Y gracias a todos ustedes por estar aquí. I'm speaking in Spanish. I didn't realize I made the switch. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. Thank you very much. So many people that I love, that I would love to have you here. Bill said one of the problems of this new model is that we don't get to go out for dinner afterwards, right? I came up with an idea for that. I'm going to share in the chat a Zoom meeting that I'm going to be there for a little bit afterwards. So obviously you don't have to, but if you feel like, oh no, wait. If you are willing to after we're done here, give me a minute to go to the bathroom, and I'll open that, and I would love to see you there. But if you don't, being here, I know it's not in anybody's list of priorities to spend time listening to someone talking about some specific topic, but I'm very grateful to you all.
Thank you, Sergio. See you. We'll connect soon again, and more to come. The future is open in front of you.
Thank you very much. Again, Susana, Bill, Devashish, I'm infinitely grateful to you for your guidance and support, and we'll see what happens next. The sky is the limit. Thank you. And if you are joining